We'd like to just hear back about comments about the process itself. We were having a talk at table one about, these texts wouldn't necessarily be suitable for Auslan, for example. And I said, look, I probably should have caveated when I set up the task, just to say that obviously these particular texts, they're in English so that it can be common, but also the pitch of them, it's more for us to have this kind of discussion. Some languages would be able to do this at different levels, and we've talked about that, perhaps differentiating it in certain ways, maybe starting with a heading or a caption and then building up and so on. So there's different ways you can treat the text, but it's really more the process of the kinds of engagement with the text that we're wanting to reflect on. So where can we start?
I think that what the discussion was here when we talked about the process was how we actually engage with the text. So it's always at different levels. One is the personal, that could be me as a female, could be me, female married, but it's also about how we engage with it culturally. So do I really see myself in the true blue kind of beef eater in terms of Australian? So you're actually engaging at all these different levels, and it's the kids that have to do that, put themselves in and out. You could actually have, once you've done this level of analysis, the potential to take an icon, for example, from Italy, the coffee machine, and have a go at an ad that would reflect that culture picture.
And I've noticed, I have to say, around this activity, a real buzz. I am absolutely persuaded that if we've got these kinds of texts that play with different perspectives, different positionings, different ways of seeing with reference to the culture that we might come from, these are all Aussie ones, but, as we work with the languages and cultures that we work in, I think that if we make those texts and those selections really carefully, those texts will do a lot of intercultural work for us. And so really consider deeply the kinds of texts and the kinds of multiplicity of perspectives and ways of thinking and ways of working with them that are going to show the students that every single text is situated in its particular cultural context, and that's what we're trying to unravel.
Okay, other comments, observations about the task itself, the nature of what we're asking students to engage in here? Obviously, analysing, interpreting, personalising.
On my table, I guess Angela kind of stole the words out of my mouth in terms of a lot of the process had to do with interacting with others. And I had my own perceptions and my own understanding of how I would interpret this text. But then with talking with others, I had a viewpoint from Minori, who is Japanese, as well as Fiona, who is Singaporean. So it just all comes down. I was able to see it from a different perspective by talking to others.
The Japanese teachers would like to show us a clip, a YouTube clip, if we can have that ready, Sam, thanks. We're just going to play a little bit, and then we'd like, I can see the recognition already. We'd invite the Japanese table at the back 23 to provide some comment around it. So see what you make of it first, and then we'll get their comment.
Konnichiwa, sumimasen, I foreigner. I don't speak Japanese, but I love ramen tempura. When you say arigato konbawa, I say Suzuki, Yamaha, Uniki, Loto, Shiba, Casio, Kochila. I'm losing my way. Oh, where should I go? Shinjuku so big. I need a Doraemon. You speak Japanglish. What can I do? Where should I go? Please take me home.
マクドナルドくくるっと入れとキットカットディズニーランドタクシーがホテルセブンイレブンミルクバスビールスターバックス 「
it's so deeply intercultural that it's hard not to. Well, you can't watch it without thinking about the intercultural. So the premise is it's called Tokyo Bon. It is a bon odori dance, which is a very deeply traditional dance that Japanese people do in August. Ancestral spirits come back and then they're farewelled in this dance. So the movement, the song that you hear is based on that song, and the movements that they do are also based on that dance. But it also obviously picks out all of those words in Japanese that Japanese have adopted, so they're English words supposedly translated, but they've taken on a life of their own. So it illustrates that the words don't make sense necessarily as English words. They're very much Japanese words.
Also, that the school girls wearing that sailor uniform, that's also that subculture sort of, all of the manga effect as well. It's exaggerating for that all of that acting, and then I think this is really appeal to that junior student.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that that's a perfect text for a discussion of cultural hybridity, because it's clearly Japanese, but it's clearly massively marked by commercial American culture, and all around the world societies are marked by American commercial culture, and a lot of this, the substrate communicative medium, is American English. And then in this one, they play with it really nicely. I mean, anyone who's been to Japan finds that a source of great amusement, the kind of nonsense words that announce cafes and things like that wouldn't mean anything in standard English, but they obviously mean something in that transitional space between Japaneseness and its encounter with the US. Now, this is actually quite a common thing, and it's a source of controversy in many countries. You know, there's always campaigns for purism and for removing English influence and stuff. So it's a great source of discussion with children, with young people, because they can identify this in ads and signs in their own environment. They can see the dynamic nature of culture, but they can also gravitate away from it if you want to mark purer, more traditional meanings, or towards it if you are pushing for a transnational interpretation of culture. But mostly this takes us beyond the culture specific, that is learning about Japan or Italy or Norway or whatever context you're talking about, in its traditional uninfluenced way, although there's no uninfluenced cultures in history, of course, but in its more stable, enduring form, to the current highly dynamic one, which worries a lot of people, of course, and it's a source of discussion around what culture is for, what do we do with culture, who creates these mediums.
I guess we really just wanted to reiterate this point around reflection, and it's something that we see deeply embedded in the Australian curriculum. This is a part of how we're thinking about language learning in contemporary times, and the critical role that reflection has taken. I mean, if you just think about the experience that we've just been through in terms of we did the tasks, but then we stood back and thought about what we were going through, how we were understanding it, what we were bringing to it, and so on. And that's the kind of decentering that we'd like students to do. There is highly likely a place for English in that. We will probably be using that as the language of higher reflection. If you can do it in target language, all the better. And I think we should be planting the seeds and developing that meta language in target language if possible, where possible. But there is most likely a place for English in doing this kind of reflecting, doing the meta level of understanding of what students are experiencing, what they're going through, and these bigger understandings of not just language and culture specific, but at the same time, at another level of abstraction, language and culture per se, the idea of language and culture in general and how that plays out.
The real linguistic and cultural work that we're doing is a reflection on the way that language itself and culture mediate or come into play in the exchange of meaning. And I am convinced, and I'm trying to convince you, that if we take the adventure into these kinds of discussions. And I don't buy the notion of, oh, it takes so much longer. It actually doesn't. It's one more piece of the conversation, 5 minutes, but at several turns to just remind people of the play of language and culture in exchanging meaning, how language and culture come into play and influence those meanings that we exchange. I am convinced that that in and of itself is just so fascinating that the students will be responsive to it, because it's opening up some conversations that they just haven't thought about language doing that. They haven't thought about their own culture. We've got students even at university that say, but Australians don't have culture. Well, we've looked at those texts together, and, you know, that is Australian culture, an aspect of it writ large. So, you know, for kids to come to understand that, that's some of the expansion that we're seeing, that we're wanting and that we're pushing for. Yes, let's use the language. Let's really be active in participating in exchange as much as we possibly can. And let us, with that, have these conversations that actually explain to and get kids to understand how it is that meanings are exchanged, what comes into play in the exchange of meaning across languages and cultures, given that every single act of language learning is an act of working across more than one linguistic and cultural world. I think it's fascinating. I hope you do too.